Winter 1942. The ruins of Stalingrad. Snow drifts through shattered windows, settling on the blackened bones of a city that once held 500,000 souls. Brick dust hangs in the air, mixed with the stench of cordite and frozen blood. Somewhere in the labyrinth of ruins, a short, mechanical burst shatters the silence, a sound that would become synonymous with German infantry throughout the war. Rat-a-tat-tat, sharp, controlled, almost surgical. A squad of grenadiers advances through the rubble of a collapsed factory. Their breath forms ghosts in the cold. Ahead, the lead man raises a compact weapon, its metal frame gleaming under the pale light. He squeezes the trigger, a short burst, and a Soviet scout drops before he can return fire. It's not a rifle, not quite a machine gun. It's something in between. This is the Maschinenpistole 38, the MP38, a weapon that would redefine how Germany fought its war. The soldiers called it the Kameradmacher, the friend maker, because in the chaos of close quarters combat, a soldier's only friend was his weapon, and few weapons inspired more confidence than this one. For the men of the Wehrmacht, the MP38 represented modernity, cold, efficient, and reliable, a tool for the new age of war Germany had unleashed upon Europe. But the story of this weapon and its echo that still lingers in the annals of warfare began long before it first barked in anger across the Volga. Fade back 4 years, Germany. 1938, the Reich is in motion. Factories hum day and night, forging steel not for peace, but for conquest. Engineers labor under the banner of the Wehrmacht's modernization plan to create a military force built around mobility, coordination, and speed. For decades, infantry weapons had changed little. Soldiers carried bolt-action rifles, accurate, powerful, but slow. The machine gun dominated defense, but it was heavy and cumbersome. Close-range fighting in trenches, cities, and forests demanded something new. Something compact. Something automatic. Something a single man could carry and fire on the move. In the offices of Irma Werke in Erfurt, an engineer named Heinrich Vollmer was already working on that idea. His vision was simple, but revolutionary. A Maschinenpistole, or machine pistol, chambered for the standard 9mm, parabellum round, capable of automatic fire, and designed for control rather than sheer power. He called it the VMP 1930, a design that caught the attention of the German Army's Ordnance Department. The Reichswehr, still bound by the Treaty of Versailles, could not officially produce modern automatic weapons, but by the late 1930s, these restrictions were already being quietly ignored. Vollmer's designs evolved, and by 1938, the prototype that would become the MP38 was ready. The MP38 was unlike anything seen before on the battlefield. Its receiver was milled from solid steel, its stock folded neatly beneath the weapon, and its barrel was compact but accurate, up to 100 meters, perfect for armored crews, paratroopers, and assault troops. The weapon's ergonomics were decades ahead of their time. It wasn't meant for spraying bullets. It was designed for controlled bursts, a philosophy that reflected German doctrine itself. Precision through discipline. The MP38 gave a man the ability to dominate close-terrain stairwells, trenches, and city streets, where the old bolt-action Mauser could barely compete. It was the perfect companion for the coming storm, the Blitzkrieg. Cut back to the battlefield. In the ruins of Stalingrad, Corporal Franz Kessler, a 22-year-old infantryman from Württemberg, crouches behind the burned hull of a T-34. He listens. The wind howls down the shattered streets, carrying the cries of wounded men and the distant thud of artillery. His MP38 rests across his knees, the metal biting cold through his gloves. He checks the magazine, 32 rounds. Enough perhaps to clear the next building. He moves. Through a hole blasted in the wall, Kessler and his squad enter a ruined apartment block. The corridors are pitch dark. Broken furniture litters the floor. Somewhere above, a Soviet machine gun rattles. Kessler lifts the MP38 sight's low finger steady. The gun feels balanced, almost alive in his hands. A figure appears at the end of the hall. A burst, 3 rounds. The enemy falls. Kessler exhales slowly. The weapon hums with heat. He doesn't think of the engineers or the factories or the politics behind it all. For him, the MP38 is survival, a lifeline in the storm that is Stalingrad. Outside, the sounds of the city's death continue, the crunch of tanks on frozen streets, the whistle of mortar shells, the endless chatter of small arms. But amid the chaos, the MP38 stands out. Distinct, recognizable. Even Soviet troops learned to identify it instantly, the crisp, staccato rhythm that meant German assault troops were near. Many would later pick them up from fallen enemies, favoring their reliability and compact design over their own submachine guns. The MP38 was more than a weapon. It was a symbol of the new German soldier, fast, mobile, and deadly in close combat. By the end of 1942, the MP38 had already proven itself across Europe and North Africa, but it was never a mass weapon. Its steel construction made it too complex, too costly. Only elite units carried it in significant numbers. Yet those who did often described it with reverence. It wasn't just a machine. It was art, the product of German precision forged for a modern war. As the war dragged on, production shifted toward a simplified version, the MP40, but the spirit of the MP38 lived on. In Stalingrad, Kessler's squad would not survive the winter. Few did. Their weapons rusted, frozen, buried under rubble, would remain long after the war ended. Years later, when Soviet sappers cleared the ruins, they would find the remains of an MP38 still, clutched in a skeletal hand, its folding stock intact, its magazine empty, a relic of a soldier's last stand. A relic of an idea that speed, precision, and steel could conquer the chaos of war. The MP38's echo still rings faintly in the corridors of history, a reminder that behind every innovation of war lies a question, not just how it was made, but why. And as we move deeper into the story of this weapon, from its birth in secrecy to its transformation into the MP40 and its lasting influence on modern warfare, we begin to understand why this simple German submachine gun became one of the most iconic instruments of the Second World War. Germany, 1930s. The Great War is over, but the silence it left behind is uneasy. Factories that once forged artillery shells now produce farm tools and locomotives. Soldiers have gone home, but not all of them have found peace. Beneath the surface of the Weimar Republic, an entire nation of veterans and engineers is still haunted by the trenches of 1918 and by a promise of revenge. The Treaty of Versailles has stripped Germany of its right to rearm. No tanks, no heavy artillery, no air force, and most crucially, no modern automatic weapons. But innovation cannot be silenced so easily. In the quiet town of Erfurt, deep in the heart of Thuringia, a small company continues its work in secret. Its name, Irma Werke. Its director, Heinrich Vollmer, a mechanical genius who has spent years studying the future of infantry firepower. Vollmer is not a soldier. He is an engineer, methodical, meticulous, and deeply pragmatic. He has watched as Germany's former enemies experiment with new ideas. The Thompson submachine gun in America, the Suomi KP-31 in Finland, and the Beretta M1938 in Italy. He sees what few others do, that the next war will not be fought in the long, open fields of Flanders, but in cities, forests, and the close quarters of mechanized warfare. The infantryman of the future, he believes, will need a weapon that can keep up with tanks and armored cars. Something that fires fast, moves fast, and can be handled by one man. At his workbench, Vollmer sketches a weapon that defies convention. It will fire the 9mm Parabellum cartridge, small enough for control, but powerful enough for close-range stopping power. It will feed from a detachable box magazine, not a cumbersome drum. And above all, it must be reliable, able to fire in mud, rain, and dust without jamming. His first designs, the VMP 1930 and EMP, are crude but promising. Vollmer's prototypes catch the attention of the Reichswehr, Germany's restricted post-war army. But with Versailles still watching, official contracts are impossible. So testing moves underground, literally. Hidden under the guise of police trials, Vollmer's weapons are sent abroad for evaluation. Some reach Spain, where German advisors observe their use in the Spanish Civil War. The reports are clear. In close combat, a short automatic weapon gives infantry an overwhelming advantage. By the mid-1930s, everything changes. The Nazis have risen to power, and Adolf Hitler has cast aside the treaty's restrictions. Germany is rearming openly now, and the need for new weapons is urgent. The Army's Heereswaffenamt, the weapons office, seeks a modern submachine gun that reflects the Third Reich's new doctrine of Bewegungskriegwehr, of movement infantry, are no longer to be static defenders. They are the spearhead of mechanized columns, fast, aggressive, and relentless. In this vision, Vollmer's weapon fits perfectly. In 1938, his designs are refined under contract with Irma Werke. The new weapon is compact and elegant, built from milled steel with a telescoping bolt and folding. Metal stock features unheard of at the time. Its lines are smooth, its balance perfect. It feels less like a tool of war and more like a precision instrument. The Army names it the Maschinenpistole 38. MP38, only a few thousand, are produced initially, intended for elite troops, paratroopers, armored crews, and officers of fast-moving assault units. But even among this small circle, it earns instant respect. To understand its significance, we must look at the weapons it replaced. For decades, German infantry had relied on the Mauser Karabiner, 98K, a bolt-action rifle with 5-round clips. It was deadly accurate at long range, but inside 100 meters where combat turned chaotic and fast, it was too slow. In the trenches of the First World War, desperate German stormtroopers had learned this lesson. They improvised by carrying captured Bergmann MP-18s, one of the world's first submachine guns. The MP-18 had shown potential, but it was heavy, complex, and expensive. The MP-38 was its spiritual successor, lighter, faster, and built for the modern soldier. Early tests at the Kummersdorf Proving Grounds impressed the Army. The MP-38's rate of fire, around 500–550 rounds per minute, was ideal, controllable, not wasteful. Its 9mm ammunition allowed soldiers to carry twice as many rounds as riflemen, and the folding stock meant it could be carried comfortably by tank crews or paratroopers. It was in every sense the perfect weapon for a new kind of war, one that would soon engulf all of Europe. Autumn 1939, the Wehrmacht crosses the Polish frontier. Columns of panzers roll east, through morning fog flanked by motorcycle scouts and infantry in gray coats. Among them, a handful of men carry the MP-38. In the confusion of urban fighting, in Warsaw, in Modlin, in the narrow alleys of Bydgoszcz, the weapon earns its baptism of fire. Reports flood back to Berlin. The MP-38 performs flawlessly. In house-to-house combat, it outclasses every rifle and carbine in the field. A short burst, accurate and compact, turns the tide of a skirmish. Soldiers describe how it cuts like a knife, through the close confines of buildings and forests. By the time of the 1940 Western campaign, the MP-38 has already become a legend among German troops. Paratroopers of the 7th Flieger Division carry it into Fort Eben-Emael, where they glide silently onto the fortress roof and overwhelm the Belgian defenders in minutes. Panzer crews use it when clearing resistance from villages on the drive to Dunkirk. And in the narrow streets of Rotterdam and Calais, its cold rhythm echoes between stone walls, a sound Allied troops would come to recognize with dread. Yet even as its reputation grows, the MP-38 reveals its flaw, complexity. Each weapon requires hours of precise machining. Every part must fit perfectly. It's a craftsman's weapon in a war that will soon demand mass production. But the engineers in Berlin already have an answer. Plans are underway for a simplified, cheaper version, one that can be stamped from sheet metal instead of milled from solid steel. It will be called the MP-40. But before that evolution, the MP-38 must first prove its worth, not in theory, but in fire and blood. The MP-38 story begins, then, not as an accident of engineering, but as a deliberate act of foresight. It is born from the lessons of the last war, shaped by the ambitions of the next, and carried into battle by men who barely understood its historical weight. For the soldiers of the Wehrmacht, it was simply the best weapon they had ever held. For historians, it marked the dawn of modern infantry combat, the moment when firepower became personal. As Europe burns in the opening years of the Second World War, the MP-38 stands as both a symbol and a prophecy, the embodiment of Germany's industrial confidence, and a glimpse of the brutal close-quarters warfare that would define the decade. France, June 1940. The dawn breaks cold and pale over the fields of the Ardennes. Mist rolls between the trees as columns of German troops move like clockwork through the countryside, armored vehicles, growling half-tracks, crunching over gravel. Somewhere among them, a young corporal named Hans Bremer sits in the back of a truck, clutching a weapon few have ever seen. Its steel gleams beneath a coat of oil. The grip is wrapped in worn leather. On its receiver, stamped into the metal, are the words, Maschinenpistole 38, Erma Werke Erfurt. The MP-38 Bremer has been issued one only days before. He has fired it just twice in a field outside Aachen at wooden silhouettes that never shot back. Now, as the trucks roll toward the Meuse, he feels the weight of it across his knees. Compact, balanced, cold. He doesn't yet know that he holds a weapon that will soon define how his army fights. The MP-38 was a weapon born ahead of its time. While the rest of the world clung to bolt-action rifles, the German army was experimenting with something entirely new, a compact automatic weapon designed for mobility, aggression, and speed. Unlike the MP-28 or other submachine guns of the interwar years, the MP-38 was not a repurposed police weapon or trench relic. It was engineered from the ground up for frontline combat. Its design reflected a new kind of warfare. Bewegungskrieg, the war of movement, where rapid assaults and combined arms coordination replaced static defense and attrition. Technically, the MP-38 was a masterpiece of industrial engineering. The weapon's receiver was milled from a single block of steel, precise, strong, but time-consuming to produce. Its bolt assembly used a telescoping design that allowed the weapon to remain compact without sacrificing reliability. The folding metal stock made from tubular steel could collapse beneath the receiver in seconds, allowing a paratrooper or tank crewman to maneuver in tight spaces. The pistol grip was ergonomically shaped, giving the soldier control even during full automatic fire. The magazine held 32 rounds of 9mm parabellum, the same ammunition used in the Luger pistol. At first glance, it seemed simple, but in practice, it was revolutionary. The MP38 fired from an open bolt, a feature that cooled the chamber and reduced cook-offs during sustained fire. Its rate of fire, around 500 rounds per minute, was deliberately moderate. Unlike the American Thompson or the Soviet PPSH-41, the MP38 was never meant to spray wildly. German doctrine emphasized short, controlled bursts. A soldier who wasted ammunition was a liability. Precision, not panic, was the rule, and that philosophy extended from the rifleman to the tank commander. Cut to a German Panzer column crossing the Meuse River. Tank hatches open, the crews peer out into the smoke. Each carries an MP38 slung across the shoulder, their lifeline should the tank be disabled. When ambushed by French infantry in close terrain, they dismount using their compact machine pistols to clear the enemy at point-blank range. For them, the MP38 is not just a sidearm, it's survival. Meanwhile, the Fallschirmjäger, Germany's elite paratroopers, adopt the MP38 as their signature weapon. On May 10, 1940, they descend on Fort Eben-Emael, Belgium's supposedly impregnable fortress. The assault lasts only hours. German engineers neutralize the defenses using shaped charges, while paratroopers armed with MP38s storm the corridors. The weapon's light weight and compactness allow them to move swiftly through narrow tunnels and bunkers. Belgian defenders armed with rifles and bayonets are overwhelmed before they can react. In the after-action reports, one line appears repeatedly: MP38 performed excellently in confined spaces. In the following months, the MP38 becomes the weapon of choice for Germany's storm units, assault pioneers, armored infantry, and reconnaissance teams. In France, Norway, and the Low Countries, it earns a fearsome reputation. Allied troops unfamiliar with its staccato rhythm begin to call every German submachine gun a Schmeisser, believing it was designed by the famous Hugo Schmeisser. In reality, Schmeisser had no role in the MP38's design, but the nickname would stick for generations. Despite its effectiveness, the MP38 had its flaws. Its milled steel components required precision machining, an artisan's process unsuited to the pace of wartime production. Every weapon demanded careful fitting, and the smooth magazine housing, though elegant, offered no protection against dirt and grit. In muddy conditions, feeding failures became common. To remedy this, soldiers were trained to treat the MP38 like a fine instrument, cleaned daily, handled with care. But as the war expanded and Germany's front stretched across continents, this was no longer practical. By late 1940, engineers at Werke and Haenel began developing an improved model. It would use stamped sheet metal instead of milled steel and a ribbed magazine well to strengthen the housing. The result would be the MP40, a weapon of mass production. But in the meantime, the MP38 remained the prized weapon of the elite, a status symbol carried by NCOs, officers, and paratroopers. North Africa, 1941. In the desert outside Tobruk, the Afrika Korps fight under the blazing sun. Dust clogs every weapon, but the MP38 proves surprisingly resilient. German infantry use it during close assaults on British positions, short bursts over sandbags and through dugouts. For the British troops defending Tobruk, the sound of its fire, sharp, even metallic, becomes instantly recognizable. One Australian veteran later described it as the sound that came just before the shouting. Back in Germany, the weapon's reputation has reached almost mythical status. Training films show idealized soldiers sweeping through villages with MP38s at the ready, the embodiment of Blitzkrieg's ferocious efficiency. Posters and propaganda photographs often exaggerate its use, giving the impression that every German soldier carried one. In truth, less than 1 in 10 did. The majority still bore the old bolt-action Mauser. But perception was power, and the MP38 gave the Wehrmacht an image of unstoppable modernity. For the men who used it, the MP38 inspired a strange kind of trust. Its recoil was smooth, its balance perfect. In skilled hands, it could place a 3-round burst exactly where it was needed. Soldiers spoke of it as though it were alive, responsive, almost intelligent. Corporal Hans Bremer, the young soldier from the Ardennes, would write in a letter home, "It is not just a weapon. It feels as if it listens to you. One small movement, one breath, and it obeys." I think it knows fear too. By the time of the invasion of the Soviet Union in June 1941, the MP38 had already become the foundation of a new philosophy of combat. The German army had discovered something essential, that firepower and mobility were no longer separate ideas. A soldier could move fast and hit hard alone without a crew or heavy support. The MP38 was the first real tool of that revolution, and as the front expanded from the snows of Russia to the sands of Libya, its influence would spread with it. In the years to come, the MP38 would evolve, multiply, and echo across every front of the war, but its heart, the design, the precision, and the doctrine it represented would remain unchanged, a weapon born of engineering, genius wielded by ordinary men, and destined to become the template for a century of small arms design. France, May 1940. Dawn. The rain has stopped, but the air still tastes of cordite. On a narrow country road near Sedan, smoke drifts from burning vehicles. A column of French soldiers retreats in confusion, rifles slung helmets, askew, their discipline unraveling beneath the roar of German armor. From the tree-lined German infantry surge forward, gray figures moving low and fast, their boots splashing through puddles. Short bursts of automatic fire cut through the mist. Rat-a-tat, the sound is crisp, precise, not the clattering chaos of machine guns, but the rhythm of something new. To the French defenders, it sounds mechanical, efficient, the heartbeat of blitzkrieg itself. To the men firing, it's the voice of confidence. They call it the Maschinenpistole 38, the MP38. By 1940, the MP38 had already proven itself in Poland, but it was in France that its legend was forged. The German strategy, Sichelschnitt, the sickle cut, depended on speed and coordination. Tanks broke through the enemy's lines, motorized. Infantry followed close behind, and the Luftwaffe hammered enemy strongpoints ahead of the advance. But between those spearheads and strongpoints lay chaos, villages, forests, and resistance, pockets where armored columns couldn't maneuver. That was where the MP38 came into its own. German infantry squads were built around the MG-34 machine gun, the most advanced light machine gun in the world at the time. But the MP38 gave the squad leaders something equally valuable: independence. No longer bound by the slow rhythm of rifle fire, he could act on instinct, maneuver aggressively, and engage targets at close range with confidence. When a squad moved into a village, the man with the MP38 led from the front. He cleared doorways, stairwells, and alleyways, while riflemen followed, securing ground room by room. A well-trained leader could fire short surgical bursts, 3 rounds, maybe 4, never wasting ammunition. In the narrow streets of Sedan, Calais, and Dunkirk, this was the weapon that broke resistance before it could form. Cut to Rotterdam, May 1940. Dutch defenders hold a bridge against German paratroopers. Machine guns rattle from the rooftops. Then silence. The paratroopers move in crouched, low-firing bursts from their MP38s as they advance across the bridge. The sound echoes off the water, sharp, even unbroken. The Dutch never expected an airborne assault. They fight bravely, but within hours the bridge falls. The MP38 light and compact has proven perfect for airborne troops. It can be dropped from gliders, fired on the move, and carried easily through tight spaces. The Germans take the bridge intact, one of the first major airborne victories in history. To the Allied troops who faced it, the MP38 seemed almost otherworldly. British soldiers at Dunkirk reported small German machine guns fired from the hip, describing them with both fear and fascination. In truth, few Germans had them, but the impression they created was enormous. The MP38 became a psychological weapon. Its distinctive metallic chatter told defenders they were facing elite troops, paratroopers, SS storm units, or Panzer grenadiers. For Allied propaganda, it became the sound of German efficiency. For the men in the field, it became something far more immediate. The signal that the enemy was close and moving fast. Cut to North Africa, 1941. The desert wind blows across the dunes as Rommel's Afrika Korps pushes toward Tobruk. Visibility is poor and the fighting is fast, ambushes, patrols hit and run attacks. In this vast open landscape, the MP38 might seem out of place, but in the close confines of Wadis and stone villages, it proves invaluable. Panzer grenadiers moving with half-tracks use the weapon to storm British positions in sudden, violent bursts. The 9mm rounds kick up sand as they strike. The bursts are short, disciplined as German NCOs lead their men forward. Even under the blazing sun where sand clogs rifles and machine guns, the MP38 keeps firing. One British officer later recalled, "You could tell when they were near. That peculiar rhythm, it wasn't a machine gun. It was something faster, tighter. You'd hear it once, then nothing, then again. They fired only when they meant to." By 1941, as Germany prepares for Operation Barbarossa, the MP38 has become a fixture in every blitzkrieg campaign, in each new offensive. From France to the Balkans, its presence marks the vanguard. German troops trained to fight as Kampfgruppen, flexible battle groups built for rapid movement. Every platoon needed at least one man with an MP38, ideally the squad leader or assault section commander. It wasn't firepower alone that made it valuable, it was initiative. In close combat, seconds mattered. Where a rifleman had to chamber each shot, the MP38 allowed a soldier to fire instantly to react faster than his opponent could. Think. Cut to a Soviet village, June 1941. The invasion of the Soviet Union has begun. Dust rises from endless columns of panzers and trucks. German infantry move cautiously through wooden houses at the edge of a field. Inside, a Soviet soldier fires his Mosin Nagant rifle from behind a table, splintering the doorframe. The squad leader ducks, switches his MP38 to full auto and fires 2 bursts, 6 rounds in. Total silence. The rifle clatters to the floor. In a war of vast distances, the MP38 thrives in the smallest of spaces, doorways, trenches, and foxholes. It is the weapon of the moment, the embodiment of the German way of war. Speed, precision, and nerve. But Blitzkrieg's brilliance comes at a cost. In 1941, as the campaign in Russia deepens, the Wehrmacht begins to realize that its beautifully engineered weapons like the MP38 are too expensive, too delicate for the grinding attrition that now lies ahead. The Eastern Front will not be won with craftsmanship alone. It will demand weapons that can be built by the millions quickly, cheaply, and without the touch of an artisan's hand. The answer will come soon in the form of the MP40, a simplified evolution of the MP38, stamped steel instead of milled. Fewer parts, easier assembly, faster production. But before the MP38 fades into history, it will leave behind something greater than its design, a doctrine. The MP38 taught the German army that firepower could be mobile, that leadership could be expressed not only through command, but through action, through the man who led the charge weapon in hand, firing in short, precise bursts. It was more than just a tool. It was an extension of the German tactical philosophy, a reflection of the same precision that moved entire armies like clockwork. When the world remembers Blitzkrieg, the lightning war, it remembers tanks, Stukas, and mechanized columns. But for the men on the ground in the villages and cities where those lightning strikes landed, the memory is different. They remember a sound, not the roar of engines or bombs, but that sharp, metallic rhythm echoing through narrow streets and shattered walls. Rat-a-tat, the voice of the MP38, the Blitzkrieg gun. Germany, 1941. In a factory outside Erfurt, sparks light the dim halls like distant artillery flashes. Rows of women and apprentices work in silence, the rhythmic hiss of welding filling the air. The smell of oil, hot steel, and tobacco clings to every surface. On the assembly benches lie hundreds of half-finished weapons, not rifles, not machine guns, but something in between. Stamped from sheet metal, their edges sharp, their shapes brutally simple. The MP38 reborn for war. This is the Maschinenpistole 40, the weapon that will arm the new German army. By late 1940, the Blitzkrieg campaigns had revealed a truth the German high command could no longer ignore. The MP38, though deadly and reliable, was far too complex to produce in the quantities modern warfare demanded. Each weapon required hours of milling, precise fitting, and machining, a masterpiece of engineering, but impractical for mass production. As Hitler's ambitions expanded, so too did the scale of the war. The army needed thousands, not hundreds, of submachine guns. The engineers at Wehrmacht were given their orders. Simplify the MP38, make it cheaper, make it faster to build, and make sure it never jams in the mud of the Eastern Front. The result was both elegant and ruthless. The MP40 was born not from innovation but from necessity. It was the same weapon in spirit, 9mm or open-bolt folding stock, but its heart was different. The finely milled steel of the MP38 was replaced by stamped sheet metal pressed into shape with industrial dies. The separate metal parts were now joined by spot welding, not screws. The grip panels were made of bakelite, a new synthetic plastic that was light, cheap, and resistant to moisture. Each change reduced cost, but also gave the weapon a distinct appearance. Simpler, darker, more utilitarian. The MP40 wasn't a craftsman's weapon. It was a soldier's tool designed to be used hard-built fast, and if necessary, discarded. The first MP40s rolled off the line in late 1940. By the following year, production had spread to multiple factories. Steyr, Daimler, Puch in Austria, Haenel, and others. The improvements were immediate. The new weapon could be produced in a fraction of the time. It was easier to maintain, easier to repair, and could be field stripped in seconds. German commanders praised it as a triumph of industrial efficiency, but among the frontline troops opinions were mixed. The MP40 was reliable, yes, but some soldiers missed the solid machined feel of the MP38. The newer model felt lighter, almost fragile. The stamped parts rattled when shaken, and under sustained fire the thin steel could warp. Still in the field it performed, and that was all that mattered. Eastern Front, 1942. The steppe stretches to the horizon, endless snow under a pale sky. Columns of German infantry move forward through drifts waist-high, their faces wrapped in scarves. Each squad carries a single MP40, sometimes two if they're lucky. In the frozen ruins of a village near Kharkov, the weapon shows its worth. The MP40's low rate of fire and manageable recoil make it perfect for room-to-room combat. When Soviet troops charge with bayonets, German grenadiers answer with short bursts, 3-4 rounds at a time. Inside barns, cellars, and trenches, the MP40 dominates. It is not about range or power, it is about control. But for every advantage, the Eastern Front reveals a flaw. The MP40's magazine, a double-stack single-feed design, is its weak point. In dust or freezing mud, it jams easily. Soldiers learn to treat it carefully, tapping it against their helmets before loading to dislodge grit. To avoid feeding issues, many carry their magazines under their coats to keep them warm and dry. The instruction manuals warn, handle with respect. The weapon will answer in kind. By 1942, over 200,000 MP40s have been produced. They are no longer exclusive to paratroopers or tank crews. Platoons on every front now receive them in France, in the Balkans, in the deserts of Libya. The MP40 has become the face of the German infantryman, the weapon seen in every photograph, every newsreel. A short, dark weapon held at the hip, its folding stock tucked beneath the arm. Even the Allies notice. Captured MP40s appear in the hands of British commandos, Soviet partisans, and American Rangers. Its compact design and 9mm ammunition make it ideal for raiding and sabotage. In the chaos of occupied Europe, the line between German and Allied weapons blurs. In the French resistance, an MP40 carried by a Maquis fighter becomes a symbol of defiance, the occupier's own weapon turned against him. Back in Germany, the propaganda machine seizes on the image. Posters show SS men and paratroopers with MP40s slung across their chests, clean, confident, unstoppable. The weapon becomes a cultural icon, a visual shorthand for the modern German soldier. Yet, behind the imagery lies a darker truth. Each MP40 carries with it the story of an industrial system that has shifted entirely to war. Every part, every stamped plate is a fragment of a nation consumed by its own machinery. Men, metal, and ideology, all mass-produced. North Africa, 1943. Rommel's men fight desperately against the encircling Allies. In the dunes outside Tunis, a young corporal fires his MP40 until the barrel glows red. He reloads, switches magazines, and continues firing even as the heat distorts his vision. When the weapon finally jams, he slams the magazine against his boot, clears the chamber, and fires again. In that moment, the MP40's purpose is clear. It isn't elegance, it's endurance. As the war drags into 1944, production reaches its peak. Nearly 1 million MP40s roll out of factories across Germany and Austria. They equip Volksgrenadiers in the Ardennes, SS troops in Normandy, and garrison soldiers in Berlin. In every theater, they serve the same purpose: to give a single soldier the firepower of a squad. But even as it spreads, the MP40 begins to show its age. By now, the Allies' field weapons that outmatch it in rate of fire and volume, the Soviet PPSH-41, the American M1A1 Thompson, and later the M3 Grease gun. The MP40, once the vanguard of modern warfare, is now simply one weapon among many. Efficient, yes, but no longer revolutionary. Still, its influence cannot be denied. The MP40 marks the moment when German engineering met industrial pragmatism, when the ideals of precision gave way to the demands of total war. It is the perfect metaphor for the Third Reich itself, brilliant in conception, efficient in execution, and ultimately consumed by the very scale of its ambition. As 1943 turns to 1944, the MP40 is everywhere: in the ruins of Stalingrad, the hedgerows of Normandy, the mountains of Italy. It is no longer the weapon of the elite, but the weapon of the common soldier, the sound of a war that has devoured the world. The next chapter, we follow that sound to every front, from the deserts of Africa to the forests of Europe, and see how the MP38 and MP40 became both feared and admired by all who faced them. The sound of wind over open fields, distant artillery, then the sharp metallic rhythm of a submachine gun. Rat-a-tat. The same sound echoing across 3 continents. The same weapon in the hands of men who speak different languages, fight for different flags, and die on the same ground. This is the story of the MP40, not as a symbol, but as a witness. From the icy forests of Russia to the sun-baked sands of North Africa, it became one of the few constants in a war that spanned the earth. Eastern Front winter, 1942. Snow falls silently over the wreckage of what was once a village. A platoon of German grenadiers moves house to house, the air filled with the low hum of wind through shattered windows. Their leader, a young sergeant named Kurt Weiss, carries an MP40. Each movement is deliberate, a hand signal, a glance, a burst of fire. Inside the houses, Soviet troops wait behind overturned tables and walls of rubble. The fighting is brutal, close, and personal. The MP40 comes alive in these moments. Short bursts at 15 meters, the weapon's rhythm slow and precise, every shot aimed. Its low rate of fire, around 500 rounds per minute, gives the shooter control, unlike the wild chatter of the Soviet PPSH-41, which sprays twice as fast. Weiss moves through smoke and dust, firing 2 rounds at a time. When his magazine empties, he drops it into the snow, reloads, and moves again. To him, the weapon feels like an extension of his arm, efficient, reliable, almost graceful. To the Soviets facing him, that same sound means something else entirely. The enemy is close. The Soviet response is swift and industrial. Within months, entire factories are turning out PPSH-41s, simple and cheap, each capable of unleashing a storm of bullets. Where the MP40 represents precision, the PPSH embodies sheer volume, the philosophy of quantity over craftsmanship. When these two weapons meet, the difference is audible. The PPSH roars like a saw. The MP40 answers with measured rhythm. In the chaos of close combat, it becomes a duel between two ideologies. One forged in the factories of Erfurt, the other born in the smoke of Leningrad. North Africa, 1942 sand. Whips against the sides of a Panzer half-track as it speeds through the desert. Inside Africa, Corps troops brace themselves, goggles down their uniforms caked in dust. Among them, the MP40s rest across knees and laps, short, compact, perfect for fighting from vehicles. When they dismount to attack, the weapon's short barrel allows quick movement in tight cover. In these battles, speed is everything. Hit, withdraw, hit again. British patrols often recover MP40s from the battlefield, testing them against their own Sten guns. The verdict is mixed. The Sten is crude but effective, a pipe gun built for pennies. The MP40 is smoother, easier to control, but too finely made for mass warfare. A British report from 1942 noted, "The German machine carbine is of superior balance and workmanship, though unsuited to manufacture in large numbers by simple means. Even the enemy admires it." Italy, 1943 rain falls over the ruins of Cassino. German paratroopers, the Fallschirmjäger, hold their ground against overwhelming Allied assaults. They fight from the upper floors of shattered buildings, firing through holes in the walls. Their MP40s, coated with dust and brick powder, keep working. In the narrow alleys of Cassino range matters little, only nerve reflex and ammunition. When British infantry close in, the Germans wait until they hear footsteps on the rubble. Then 3 bursts, controlled, efficient. Each one stops and advance cold. A New Zealand officer later wrote, "It was like fighting ghosts in the ruins." They fired short, quick bursts, always 2 or 3 shots. You never saw them until it was too late. France, 1944. The tide of war has turned. Now, German troops are the ones defending in hedgerows, villages, and cities. The MP40, once the weapon of the conqueror, is now the weapon of the cornered. In Normandy, it's used by weary veterans, by boys from the Hitler Youth, by foreign volunteers of the Waffen-SS. In the dense Bocage countryside, its compact frame makes it deadly in ambush. A German soldier can fire from behind a bush or a farm wall and vanish before a tank's gun can turn. But against the overwhelming firepower of the Allies, Bars Thompsons and M1 Garands, the MP40's modest range and 32-round magazine begin to show their limits. It was made for lightning war. Now it fights in retreat. France again, but this time in the shadows. In occupied Paris, resistance fighters prepare an ambush. One of them, a young woman named Claire. Dufour checks the magazine of an MP40 taken from a dead German officer. For months, the weapon has changed hands. In silence, passed through cellars, hidden under floorboards, cleaned with stolen oil. Now it will speak again. When the German convoy approaches, Claire fires from the doorway, short bursts, just as she's been taught. The weapon jerks, spits flame, and fills the narrow street with the echo of the occupier's own war cry. For the first time, the sound of the MP40 belongs not to fear but to liberation. 1944, the MP40 is everywhere. In German hands, in Allied hands, and in those of countless partisans across Europe. It becomes the most recognizable silhouette of the war. The folding stock, the curved magazine, the distinctive profile of industrial war. But its story is also a reflection of the soldiers who carried it young men and women from all nations caught in the machinery of global conflict. Some carried it by choice, others by necessity. Many never fired more than a few bursts before the war swallowed them whole. Ardennes Forest Winter 1944. Snow muffles the sound of battle. German paratroopers, outnumbered and freezing, move through the trees during the Battle of the Bulge. The MP40, its metal freezing, cold to the touch, still functions. In the dense forest at 10 meters it is perfect, deadly and quiet, but the fuel runs out, the ammunition dwindles, and the once mighty army retreats. The MP40, once the tool of conquest, becomes the weapon of survival. The war draws to its end in the rubble of Berlin. The MP40 is still there. In the hands of the last defenders, old men, boys, foreign conscripts, it fires until the very end. When the Red Army storms the Reichstag, they find piles of MP40s among the ruins. Their magazines empty, their barrels scorched. For 6 years, it had followed Germany from triumph to ruin, from the lightning wars of 1939 to the final collapse in 1945. When peace finally returns, the MP40 does not disappear. It resurfaces in conflicts across the world in the hands of partisans, police, and soldiers in wars of independence. From the streets of Jerusalem to the jungles of Indochina, its design endures. Simple, reliable, familiar. The ghost of a war that still echoes. In every theater, in every battle, the MP40 served as more than a weapon. It was a symbol of speed, precision, and a nation's fatal pursuit of efficiency. It was the voice of the blitzkrieg, the echo of retreat, and finally the whisper of a fallen empire. Berlin, May 1945. The war is over. Smoke drifts between the ruins of the capital, shattered stone, broken glass, and the silent skeletons of buildings that once defined an empire. On the steps of the Reich Chancellery, among the scattered papers and bullet casings, lies an empty MP40. Its metal is scorched. The stock is bent. It has done its work, and the world has moved on. The MP38 and MP40 were born into a world of precision and ambition, weapons built for a lightning war that promised victory through speed and willpower. But by the time the last shots were fired, they had become relics of an exhausted empire. Yet their story did not end in the rubble. It continued in the hands of soldiers, rebels, and filmmakers for decades to come. When the smoke cleared and Europe began to rebuild, tens of thousands of MP40s remained scattered across the continent. In the cellars of Berlin, in the forests of Poland, and in the warehouses of defeated armies, they waited, silent souvenirs of the most devastating war in history. The Allied powers collected them by the truckload. Some were melted down, their metal repurposed for peacetime industry. Others were stored, sold, or passed on to new armies in the power vacuum that followed. The Cold War was beginning, and in its earliest years, the MP40 found itself once again in the hands of men preparing for battle. In Eastern Europe, Soviet-aligned militias used captured MP40s as they rebuilt their forces. In the Balkans, they armed both communist partisans and anti-communist fighters. And across the Mediterranean, they became weapons of revolution, carried by Israeli fighters in 1948, by French paratroopers in Indochina, by partisans in Algeria and Greece. It was a strange afterlife for a weapon once built to serve the Reich. Now it served anyone with a cause, anyone with ammunition and a will to fight. The MP40's design was simple enough to survive the decades. Its stamped construction and open bolt system made it easy to repair even in crude workshops. Its 9mm ammunition was universal, and its compact size made it ideal for guerrilla warfare. In the 1950s and 60s, it appeared again, this time in black and white newsreels of civil wars and uprisings. In Hungary, rebels carried them through the streets of Budapest during the 1956 revolt. In Africa, independence fighters held them aloft as symbols of resistance. What began as a weapon of conquest had become a weapon of liberation. But the MP40's true legacy wasn't just mechanical, it was cultural. In the post-war years, filmmakers, historians, and veterans began to reconstruct the memory of the Second World War. And when audiences saw a German soldier on screen, they saw him with an MP40 in his hands. From the earliest post-war films, The Longest Day, Cross of Iron, A Bridge Too Far, to the modern war dramas that followed, the MP40 became more than a prop. It was a shorthand for an era of visual echo of the men who once carried it. That curved magazine, the folding stock, the slow, deliberate burst, it all spoke of a kind of soldier that history both feared and studied. To filmmakers, it symbolized the machine-like precision of the Wehrmacht. To veterans, it was the sound that haunted their memories. To collectors, It became an artifact, the tangible weight of history. Yet beyond myth and memory, the MP40's influence extended into the next generation of firearms. Designers from around the world studied its ergonomics and compact form. The Soviet PPSH-41 British Sten, and later the Uzi and MP5 all drew something from its simple logic, a weapon that balanced control size and rate of fire for close combat. The MP40 showed that the future of warfare lay not in rifles or heavy machine guns, but in individual firepower, the ability of a single soldier to dominate the space around him. It anticipated the philosophy that would define modern small arms: mobility, modularity, and efficiency. But for those who had lived through it, the MP40 meant something deeper, something human. To the German soldier, it was a tool of survival, compact, dependable, a friend in the chaos. To the Allied soldier, it was a sound to fear, and sometimes a prize to capture. To the resistance fighter, it was both a weapon and a symbol. The power of the oppressor now turned against him. And to the historian, it was a lens through which to see the war itself. From the early confidence of Blitzkrieg to the grim desperation of the Reich's final days. In the archives of the Bundeswehr Museum in Dresden, one MP40 is displayed behind glass. Its metal is worn smooth by years of handling. The bakelite grips are scratched, its serial number barely visible. Beside it lies a small card, recovered near Stalingrad 1943, carried by Oberfeldwebel Kurt Weiss, 29th Infantry Division. The record says he never made it home. The weapon did. It sits there now mute, unjudging, a witness to a world that destroyed itself in pursuit of order. 80 years later, the MP38 and MP40 remain among the most recognizable weapons ever made. Not because of their numbers, though, over 1 million were built, but because of what they represented. They were the face of an army that changed warfare forever. They were the tools of men caught between discipline and destruction. And they were, in their own mechanical way, the sound of the 20th century being rewritten in fire. In the end, every weapon tells a story not of the machine itself, but of the hands that held it. The MP40 tells of soldiers who believed their war would be swift and clean. Of engineers who turned craftsmanship into mass production. Of a nation that built perfection and then watched it crumble under its own weight. And when we hear that sound, that slow, rhythmic rat-a-tat, we hear not just the echo of gunfire, but the rhythm of history itself. A reminder that every invention, no matter how precise or powerful, carries the mark of the age that made it. And the men it consumed fade out. The screen darkens. Only the echo remains soft, distant, unmistakable. Rat-a-tat. The voice of a weapon that changed the world and never truly left it behind.